Nancy Janice is the former theater columnist and reviewer for the Waterbury Republican American, and now is a freelance theater critic. Nancy was not available to speak here during Women's History Month, but here at the corner, it's always Women's History Sunday. So please give a warm Justice Southbury welcome to Nancy Janice. Right up closer.
Thank you, Rick. My full name is Nancy Sasso Janice, and I thank you for the invitation to speak to you all today. As a bit of background, I taught first grade in Naugatuck for 36 years before I retired in 2021. I continue to serve as the webmaster with Naugatuck Teachers Union, where I am able to advocate for active teachers and students and proudly march with CEA pride. I have been working as a theater reviewer for the last 15 years, and I am a member of the Connecticut Critics Circle. Since my retirement, I have also performed in many community theater productions, and I have even had a few paid acting gigs. Because I was performing in an Easter play, I was unable to be here during Women's History Month. But during the month that honors herstory, I reflected on our foremothers, specifically the Suffragettes. One of my first shows was a musical version of Schoolhouse Rock Live when I was still teaching. Does anyone remember Schoolhouse Rock? They were educational vignettes that were run between Saturday morning cartoons. One of my favorites was Suffer Until Suffrage, which detailed a brief history of late 19th and early 20th century women's rights and the early feminist leaders who crusaded for the 19th Amendment, which gave women across the country the right to vote in all elections. Remember the lyrics? Not a woman here could vote no matter what age. Then the 19th Amendment struck down that offensive rule. Suffragettes were also represented in the film Mary Poppins, with Winifred Banks joining the cause, although she is not portrayed as such in the Disney Broadway musical version. The new Broadway musical, Suffs, chronicles the American suffragist movement, highlighting the relationships and activism behind the fight for women's rights. For those of us who may have missed the tour of the Tony-winning musical, it's going to air on PBS's Great Performances on Friday, May 8th at 9 o'clock, with streaming available on pbs.org and the PBS app. It is almost unfathomable that women of my grandmother's generation were not able to vote when they came of age. I am grateful to the brave women who marched to secure the right to vote. In the current political climate, I fear that many voters' rights are under attack, and I think it is important to make sure that everyone who is eligible to vote is able to do so. When we say every vote matters, we have to mean it. The Save America Act would create unnecessary barriers for an estimated 21 million eligible voters, including young voters, voters with disabilities, low-income voters, voters of color, and people who have changed their name after marriage. It would also take away the ability for millions of people to vote by mail, except for rare circumstances. I will preface this with the assertion that I have no problem with providing an ID when I check in to vote. In fact, I can't remember a time that I have voted since I turned 18 that I have not been required to do so. I can speak from personal experience about the hoops through which people who have changed their names must jump. And to those women who say that it is simply a matter of keeping track of important documents, I question why we must work harder to vote than a man. So on to those documents. I decided to apply for a real ID last year. I learned that my birth certificate given to my parents from the health department is currently not considered to be official. This required a trip to the city of my birth to procure a new one for the bargain price of $20. Then, in order to document the trail of my surname, I gathered the original copy of the marriage certificate of my first marriage, the original divorce decree, and the original of the marriage certificate for my second marriage, which I keep in a fireproof lockbox. Unfortunately for me, my license renewal date closely coincided with the May TSA deadline, so appointments with the DMV were at a premium. Armed with a folder full of documents, I traveled to Wethersfield. When my number was called, the DMV clerk had to check with a supervisor before she could proceed. She then indicated that it was a very good thing that I brought along the entire divorce decree for copying. The renewal fee was $72. Since I had all these hard copies in one place, I then decided to follow the advice of my sister, a longtime flight attendant, to apply for a passport to definitely prove my U.S. citizenship. Of course, first I needed a passport photo to be taken at a cost of $17.99 and a check for $130, plus a USPS passport fee of $35. Although it was with trepidation that I enclosed my original documents, the experience at the post office actually proved to be easier than applying for a passport for a minor child scheduled for a European high school trip. So no, it is not as easy as carrying one piece of paper, as some have suggested, at least for those of us who have remarried. And the fact that since early in my first marriage, I have used my birth surname, my maiden name Sasso, as a middle name made no difference whatsoever. To me, one aspect of these requirements is to suppress the rights of transgender people. However, the transgender folks who have changed their first names simply have to produce the probate court order that shows both names, and I would guess that many of them carry it with them or can easily access a copy. Emailing our senators now is one of the most effective ways that we can take to express our displeasure with this. Through my late mother and father and my grandmothers, I have inherited a love of fiber arts. I have brought along a red hat that is called a Melt the Ice cap, which I have been knitting for friends to wear to peaceful protests. The hats began as a way to honor the victims in Minnesota. With a small donation, I was able to download the directions. Needle and Skein notes that in the 1940s, Norwegians made and wore red pointed hats with a tassel as a form of visual protest against Nazi occupation of their country. Within 2 years, the Nazis made these protest hats illegal and punishable by law to wear, make, or distribute. As purveyors of traditional craft, they felt it appropriate to visit this design. I have some mini versions of the hat with me today that may be used as a pin or tied to a bag. If anyone would like a knitted Melt the Ice hat, I can give you my card to request one. Thank you.